Welcome to the first NFL Draft positional ranking film room. I'm going to be doing these for every position, obviously starting with quarterback and then going down the line. And this video has been by far the most time-consuming video I've ever done, so I would really appreciate you guys leaving a like to help out the YouTube algorithm. We're going to be starting at number 10 and going all the way to number 1, and I've included timestamps for every player, so if you're just interested in a few prospects, feel free to jump around the video. But if you want to watch it in order with no spoilers, you can do that as well. I'd encourage you to check out my Patreon, where you'll get access to my draft film rooms. You can request a breakdown of any player, and I'll do it. I'm also very close to releasing version 1 of my NFL draft guide, which by April will have full scouting reports on over 300 players, so definitely go check that out. And then final thing before we get into it, I have NFL comps for all of these players, but the way I do player comparisons is not how good a player is. I'm looking at size, athleticism, play style, and relative strengths and weaknesses. So for example, my NFL comp for Malik Willis is Josh Allen, but I think it's extremely unlikely that Malik Willis turns into a Josh Allen caliber of player. And ultimately, these are just kind of for fun, and I don't spend all that much time thinking of them. Okay, starting at number 10, we've got Cole Kelley out of Southeast Louisiana. And the number 9 and 10 quarterbacks on the list are from really small schools where I couldn't get any All-22, so no film for those guys. But Cole Kelley is a huge quarterback, 6'7", actually transferred from Arkansas, and he's a really interesting prospect. His film kind of looks like that Andy Reid video from the punt pass kick competition. He's a pretty good runner, and he actually does an okay job working through his progressions, but Kelley's biggest issues are he has a really slow release, his footwork and accuracy are not that great, he's terrible at sensing pressure, and he's pretty reckless with the football. With the late round quarterbacks, you're really just looking for guys that have one or two interesting traits, but I don't see Cole Kelley as a draftable prospect, so let's move on. My number 9 quarterback is E.J. Perry out of Brown. The main reason E.J. Perry makes this list is that he actually had a really good performance at the Shrine Bowl. He ran a 4.53, so he's got some nice mobility. His arm strength and accuracy are okay. The main problem with E.J. Perry is that he doesn't take very good care of the football, and I don't really see a path for him to be a starter in the NFL. Okay, now we are on to some more interesting guys, starting with my number 8 quarterback, Bailey Zappe. And Zappe had a record-setting 62 touchdowns last season at Western Kentucky, but I view him as more of a backup in the NFL. The first thing that stuck out with me when I turned on his film was that he has phenomenal touch. If I needed one guy in this class to throw a goal line fade, I'd be tempted to take Bailey Zappe. He doesn't have a very strong arm, which we'll get to, and I was pretty underwhelmed with his receiver's ability to separate down the field. So being able to just loft these passes into the perfect location was a big part of Western Kentucky having a downfield passing attack. And Zappe's accuracy on deep throws was pretty consistent. He didn't leave a ton of big plays on the field, but he just doesn't have a strong arm really at all. I mean, it's barely NFL caliber. You'll see this occasionally when he's trying to push the ball downfield. Right here, he just doesn't have the juice to hit his receiver in stride, and the play ends up being a touchdown, which is a good example of how misleading statistics can be. Right here, he's trying to hit this post route in the red zone. He isn't being pressured, so there's no reason to throw off his back foot like this, but he isn't able to get it there. Here's a play where he drops the snap, sees that he's got a receiver open if he leads him to the back of the end zone, but since he's not able to fully go through his throwing motion, the pass comes up short and it gets intercepted. And then you also see this issue when it comes to throwing velocity. His passes just don't travel quickly enough, and there's a lot of throws that end up complete or incomplete that NFL DBs are going to intercept. This deep out right here is a pick six 9 times out of 10 in the NFL. He's got a lot of plays like this where he's just lofting a whole shot into cover 2 or something, and they're playing Rice, so the safeties aren't getting over quickly enough, but probably going to be a different story next year. Another negative from Bailey Zappe's tape is that he was too trusting of his receivers to win 50-50 balls. There were a lot of times he'd just lock in on the go route and throw it regardless of whether his receiver won the release or had any separation, which if you've got Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, sure, that's a good throw to make, but it resulted in a few interceptions at WKU. In my opinion, Bailey Zappe is better at manipulating defenses with his eyes than any quarterback in this class. There's a few guys we'll get to that like to stare down the receivers, but Zappe does not have that issue at all. If we check out this play against Michigan State, he's looking for the slant to the left, not open, so he moves to the right, widens out that linebacker and fits it in right behind him. Looks like he wasn't expecting the receiver to stop. Here's another one in the red zone, moving the linebackers with his eyes to open up a window in the back. And then right here, he's gonna hold this boundary safety by looking at number 3, which creates an open space in the seam. When it comes to sideline throws, like Bailey Zappe cannot throw those. He either doesn't have the arm strength to get it there fast enough, or he's inaccurate with his ball placement. He has really sloppy footwork just in general, but especially on short to intermediate throws. So that's something that he's got to fix, because if he's my quarterback in the NFL, I'm pretty much removing out routes from my offense. So yeah, Bailey Zappe is to me a backup quarterback with not a ton of upside, but he can definitely operate an offense and maybe win you a couple games eventually. We've actually got 2 quarterbacks tied at number 7, which is pretty crazy since my grades are calculated with like 15 variables. But tied at number 7 is California quarterback Chase Garbers. And Chase Garbers has, I would say, an average arm for the NFL, but his accuracy down the field is really good. His footwork is very consistent, especially from a clean pocket. He's got a really smooth throwing motion as far as connecting his upper body and lower body, keeping his eyes locked with his feet. And he's got solid touch and I think a relatively quick release. But when he's pressured, that all kind of goes out the window. He had this one amazing throw on the move, but in general, he throws off his back foot when he's pressured. He doesn't keep his eyes downfield when he's on the move, and his decision making is pretty bad in those situations also. So to me, Chase Garbers is a 4th to 5th round talent. And then also coming in at number 7 is Carson Strong, who I'm definitely a bit lower on than most people. I think consensus has him as a 2nd rounder, but I just don't see it. I mean, his arm is outstanding just in terms of how far can you throw the ball. Carson Strong is probably a top 10 quarterback the minute he gets drafted. But outside of that, there just isn't very much on his tape that I was impressed with. So staying on the point of throwing the ball deep, he can absolutely get it there, but his deep accuracy is not very consistent. Honestly, accuracy in general is pretty underwhelming. He's another guy who I do not trust to throw a deep out on the sideline. He's also pretty careless with the football. He had a ton of dangerous throws that didn't end up as interceptions, but he was either throwing it into traffic or staring down his receivers or not seeing defenders. And then athletically, he's obviously got the prototypical pocket passer frame, but he's probably the slowest quarterback in this class, which obviously means he's not a threat as a runner, but the main issue is that he has pretty much no escapability when he gets pressured. And it's possible for slow quarterbacks to resolve that issue. Tom Brady is slow as hell, but he's so good at recognizing pressure and then manipulating and navigating the pocket that he pretty much never got sacked. With Carson Strong, he either just drifts backwards and ends up throwing off his back foot, or he tries to scramble but just doesn't get anywhere. I will say that when he's on the move, he is actually pretty accurate and he keeps his eyes down the field, so there's some positives to work with there. But overall, if Carson Strong is my quarterback, I'm not feeling comfortable unless I have a top 5 offensive line. So yeah, Carson Strong to me is a quarterback prospect with an elite arm and an extremely quick release, but not too much else to get excited about. And then the last thing with Carson Strong is that he has a major medical red flag. This is what it's called. I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but everything I've read says that it's really serious and possibly career threatening. All right, at number 5, we've got Cincinnati quarterback Desmond Ridder, and I went with the Ryan Tannehill comp. I don't love it, but there's definitely some similarities. Athletically, they're pretty similar as far as being really fast, but not all that elusive. I think Desmond Ridder is a quarterback where you can definitely take advantage of his athleticism within the structure of your offense. He's really good executing the read option, and his ability to throw on the run makes him a perfect fit for a Shanahan style of offense. That's probably the area where I was most impressed with Desmond Ridder. On play action boot, he's extremely accurate throwing on the run. So that's a great thing for a quarterback prospect when you kind of know you've got something that you can add to your offense that he'll be able to do at a high level. Ridder is another guy that has great touch on his throws, and you see this with fade routes and deep stuff along the sideline, but the biggest thing for me is his touch over the middle of the field, and this is another area where I really do see the Ryan Tannehill comp. Tannehill and Ridder are both really good with ball placement on play action over the middle of the field, being able to fit it over the linebackers and in front of the safeties. I was super impressed with what I saw from Desmond Ridder there. And then the other positive I would say for Ridder is his experience, not just in terms of how many snaps he's played, but being in a pro-style offense, changing up protections at the line, playing in a lot of games. I think Desmond Ridder's intangibles are probably the best in the class. But there are a lot of red flags that keep him out of the first round for me. First of all, his arm strength is just okay, but he attacks down the field like he has an elite arm, which results in a ton of underthrown deep passes. He's also really bad about staring down his receivers, and that's not a function of an inability to process or get past his first read. It's just anytime he's got a half-field read where he's looking at the defense pre-snap and saying, okay, it's zone coverage, so I'm working this concept on the left. He's really bad about just staring down that target, and I want to remind everyone that this is college tape that I'm showing, and safeties and linebackers at the next level are going to make Desmond Ridder pay for that habit a lot more frequently. There's also the issue of decision making. He has a handful of awful head-scratching decisions every game. He will just not see defenders and loft up easy interceptions. He'll get too aggressive when he's pressured. Decision making for Desmond Ridder was a major issue in my opinion. He also has a pretty slow release, which on top of his tendency to stare down receivers resulted in a lot of throws getting batted at the line of scrimmage. And then on top of that, he's 6'4", 215 pounds, which is a super light, slender frame. So I have pretty serious durability concerns with Desmond Ridder, especially as a mobile quarterback. And when you top all of those red flags off with the fact that he's a redshirt senior, it's difficult to project too much development in those areas. So to me, Desmond Ridder is a mid-second round prospect. Okay, buckle up, ladies and gentlemen, because at number 4, we've got Malik Willis, who is by far the most polarizing quarterback prospect I've ever evaluated. And I just mean polarizing internally in my own brain. And I want to start by showing you these two back-to-back plays that epitomize what I'm talking about. So I'm watching this game, they're playing Campbell, and Malik Willis makes this beautiful throw down the sideline. And this is like my 5th Malik Willis game I've watched. At this point, I'm not a big fan, and I see this throw and I'm like, you know what? I think I'm being too hard on Malik Willis. This dude's arm talent is just insane. And then the very next play, he completely ignores the flat defender dropping off into the hole, and he lofts up what should have been an easy interception. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's why. But honestly, Malik Willis has the best arm in this class. I really don't think it's close. I mean, his ability to put the ball exactly where he wants it, any area of the field, leaning back on one foot, 2 defenders hanging off of him, it doesn't matter. He has such a quick release and he throws with so much velocity, he can just legitimately fit the ball into any window. And I'm gonna be a little bit repetitive with this because I think it's important to hammer home the fact that this isn't just a quarterback with a good arm that we see every year. This isn't Christian Hackenberg or Paxton Lynch or just someone with a strong arm. Malik Willis has generational arm talent. It's not always consistent, he isn't always accurate, but the high end on Malik Willis's tape is legitimately special. He's also an elite athlete, and I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that he's in the Michael Vick, Lamar Jackson tier as far as what he can do with his legs, and that does give Malik Willis a somewhat high floor, because let's say that he is truly awful passing the ball in the NFL. Worst case scenario, you just design your scheme around Malik Willis's legs, and you can sort of manufacture an offense that way. And I also don't mind Malik Willis's build as a mobile quarterback. He's only 6 feet tall, which obviously isn't ideal, but at 220 pounds, he's really kind of built like a running back. I don't worry too much about his ability to absorb contact and stay healthy. Another thing, and this is sort of related to his mobility, but Malik Willis is great at extending plays, keeping his eyes downfield when he's on the move. Liberty didn't do a ton of designed rollout stuff, but I think he could be successful doing that. But he made a lot of plays escaping pressure and finding open receivers on broken plays. As far as intangibles, I don't have the advantage of getting to interview players and stuff like that, but from people that have sources, I've probably heard more positives about Malik Willis's leadership and, personality than anyone in this class. And then the last thing for the positives, I want to push back on this thing that we do with black quarterbacks where people just based on nothing say that they can't read a defense. I've seen this being said about Malik Willis, and it honestly couldn't be further from the truth. Liberty's offense was about as complex as any offense that any of these quarterbacks played in. I would honestly say they could have benefited from simplifying it a little, not because Malik Willis couldn't handle it, but because it's a college offense with college players. But I could spend this entire video going through play after play of Malik Willis getting to his 3rd and even 4th read. Right here, he's working this flat go to the field side. It's covered, so he moves to the backside where he's got this deep curl coming open, but he puts his eyes on the backside dig to freeze the hook defender and then comes back to the curl. Here's another example of literally the exact same play. Flat go to the field, moves to the backside. This time the defense is in man coverage, so the number 1 has an option route and he breaks the deep curl into a deep out. Again, look at how quick his release is and how fast the ball travels. And then here's one more. Louisiana is in too high pre-snap. Willis goes 1 to 2. Now his second read is this deep crosser, which if Louisiana is in cover 2, this would potentially be open, but they've rotated into 3 buzz. So this deep safety's sitting on the second read. Willis says, okay, I've got cover 3, the seam's open, hit the deep curl on the backside. So that's a ton of positives for a quarterback who I view as a mid to early second rounder. And like I've said, the positives on Malik Willis's tape are outstanding, but the negatives are pretty negative. So let's start with decision making, and I should probably clarify the difference between decision making and processing. I define processing as what I just went over, reading a defense, operating and executing an offense based on what you read. Decision making is more like in the moment, quick decision kind of stuff. And Malik Willis's decision making is honestly a train wreck, and I'm just gonna go through some examples. Right here, we've got the classic sideline throw against tight coverage that could have easily been a pick 6. Here's another one. This deep third defender is just eyes on the quarterback, waiting to break on this flat route. Willis stares it down all the way through and also commits the cardinal sin on sideline throws of throwing it late and inside. Another one from the Louisiana game where, I don't view this as a processing, reading the defense issue. The defense is split safety pre-snap and they literally drop straight into cover 2. The one area you do not throw to against cover 2 is the flat. Like this flat defender is literally just sitting there and Malik Willis throws the ball to him. Here, Liberty's running a fake screen and go. From the moment the ball is snapped, Malik Willis is throwing this go route no matter what. He doesn't bother to check this safety who's reading the entire play as it develops, so just an easy pick. Exact same play against Ole Miss, except they're faking a bubble screen. But again, you've got a safety playing the deep half on the sideline that you're throwing the ball to. It shouldn't be a surprise that he's covering this route. I don't understand why he makes these throws. This one is a play action seam route over the middle. The linebacker bites and recovers depth. Willis doesn't account for him, doesn't throw with enough touch, and it gets intercepted. Now they're running a stop and go, and this one is a bit more on the processing side because this play side safety comes down. Willis is staring down the route and he doesn't see the backside safety rotating over, and it should have been an interception. And then right here, he gets pressured, flushed out of the pocket, and just lofts up a prayer that gets intercepted. So I could keep going on, but the bottom line is Malik Willis is awful at taking care of the football, and his decision making is just almost offensive. And I guess this is sort of the central question with every draft evaluation, but I can't honestly say that I expect him to improve in this area. It's obviously possible, but I think it's unlikely. The next issue that Malik Willis has is footwork, and I don't actually think it's accurate to say that his footwork is a problem because that implies that he has actual throwing mechanics that are consistent from play to play. He's just kind of out there slinging the ball around, and because he has so much natural arm talent, like I've shown, you get a lot of amazing off-platform throws, but you also get ball placement that's all over the place, and it can be the result of any number of issues. Normally when a quarterback has accuracy issues, it's because of one or maybe two mechanical flaws, but Malik Willis throws off his back foot, he'll sidearm throws, he'll short arm throws. When he gets pressured, a lot of times he doesn't draw his back shoulder far enough back. Sometimes he generates all of his power from his arm and torso. Sometimes he rotates his hips with too much force. There just isn't a consistent mechanical process that you can look at and say, this is the issue he needs to fix to improve his accuracy. And accuracy for a quarterback is notoriously difficult to improve. So I never like to speak in absolutes with draft prospects, but I think Malik Willis is just not ever going to be an accurate quarterback. The final major red flag for Malik Willis is his pocket presence, and it's easy to watch his film against not that great a competition, see him gliding around the backfield and think that his pocket presence is good, but it's not. First of all, he takes way too many terrible sacks, and he needs to learn to just throw the ball away. And when he gets any sort of pressure, his immediate reaction is to scramble. Stepping up into the pocket is just not a part of his game, and making Houdini plays on the run is exciting and electrifying, but in the NFL, you need to be able to operate from within the pocket, and you need to be able to maneuver the pocket when it isn't perfectly clean, and Malik Willis just doesn't have that ability. Evaluating this aspect of his game is really difficult. I want to finish by just showing 4 plays that I genuinely don't know what to make of. They're technically spectacular plays, but I just don't see them happening at the next level. So we've spent a ton of time talking about Malik Willis, and my overall conclusion is that I just don't think it's very likely that he becomes a good NFL quarterback, but the ceiling is so astronomically high that in the second round, I don't hate taking a chance on him as a lottery ticket. At number 3, we've got Kenny Pickett, who is far less entertaining than Malik Willis, and these top 3 quarterbacks are pretty close to me. I see all 3 of them as mid to late first round prospects in this draft, although I expect them to go higher because of how many teams need a quarterback. So Kenny Pickett is like the vanilla ice cream of QBs. He's the quarterback equivalent of a 3.0 GPA. There's not much on his tape that excites you and makes you think, oh, I've got to draft this guy, but there aren't many red flags or areas that he struggles. And again, this is another example of my NFL comp not being about how good of a prospect they are. I'm not saying Kenny Pickett is Joe Burrow. I would say the best thing about Kenny Pickett is his poise under pressure and his ability to keep his eyes downfield and throw accurately on the run. That's where most of his wow moments come from. He did a lot of nice things out of structure last season. Although I will say when it comes to dealing with pressure, he holds on to the ball way too long. He's the guy more than any of these quarterbacks who I think will suffer from Baker Mayfield syndrome, where you were able to outrun defensive ends in college, but you just don't have the speed to do that in the NFL. So Kenny Pickett needs to work on speeding up his processing and getting rid of the ball quickly because he's not going to be able to make a lot of these plays next year. And yeah, everything else really about Kenny Pickett is just above average. His arm is okay. He has an NFL arm, but it's nothing spectacular. His accuracy is solid, but he misses throws on occasion. For the most part, he protects the football, but there's some bad decision making here and there. He's really just good, but not great at pretty much everything. The only major red flags are, first of all, his age and the fact that he didn't break out until his redshirt senior season. And then also his hand size, which I know is kind of a meme, but he reportedly has like 8-inch hands, and there's never been a starting quarterback in the NFL with hands that small. And the NFL ball is an inch bigger in circumference. You saw him at the Senior Bowl kind of struggle throwing in the rain. So it's not a deal breaker, but I do think that hand size is a legitimate concern. My number 2 quarterback is Sam Howell, and by process of elimination, you've probably figured out that Matt Corral is my number 1 quarterback. And both of these QBs are eerily similar as prospects, so the final 2 segments will be a little redundant. But Sam Howell has, I would say, a borderline elite arm. I think Corral's arm is slightly better, but Howell can make every throw. His release is a bit drawn out, but his velocity kind of cancels out those issues. He's a legitimate threat as a runner, both on design runs and making plays outside of the pocket, but his accuracy on the move is terrible. With his feet set, his ball placement is pretty solid, but when he's running, he's not an accurate quarterback at all. The most impressive aspect of Sam Howell's tape to me is how consistently he was able to connect on throws to the sideline. When he's throwing a deep out, he has outstanding accuracy. Like I mentioned, the ball just teleports from his hand to the receiver, and he doesn't wait for the receiver to break on his route. He throws guys open. The biggest negative for Sam Howell as a prospect is that he takes way too many bad sacks, and I think that's fixable, but at this point, he's not someone who deals with pressure very well at all. The other negative is that he played in a very gimmicky offense that was pretty much RPOs, screens, and go balls. So Sam Howell's tape just doesn't tell us very much about his ability to process and operate an NFL offense. He's a late first rounder to me. I don't love Sam Howell as a prospect, but I think you definitely take a chance on the arm talent. And coming in at number 1 is Matt Corral, who, like I said, as a prospect, almost a carbon copy of Sam Howell. They're both undersized, they're both very mobile, they both have great arm talent, and they both played in offenses that would be unrecognizable in the NFL. So Matt Corral, I do think, has a slightly better arm than Sam Howell, second best arm in the class behind Malik Willis, and you just look at the throws he's able to make, whether he has a clean pocket to step into or he's got a defensive lineman in his face. Matt Corral legitimately has access to the entire field. Another thing that I think differentiates Corral is his accuracy on deep throws. Very few overthrows on his tape, hardly any underthrows. He consistently hits his receivers in stride, and his release is outstanding. The ball just explodes out of his hand. I think Matt Corral is a pretty safe prospect in terms of executing a downfield passing attack, especially if you give him a lot of play action with simple reads and you scheme a lot of stuff open. But that leads me to the biggest issue that I have with Corral, which is that Ole Miss's offense is terrible in terms of projecting a quarterback to the NFL. I would say Ole Miss's offense is even more college-y than UNC's. It was just screens, RPOs, fake screens, double moves, there just weren't very many opportunities to evaluate Matt Corral's processing ability. But even within that simplified offense, I thought Corral missed a lot of reads. He really just locks onto his first read, and if it's not open, he'll either force the throw or bail from the pocket. So processing is a legitimate question mark for Matt Corral, and it's the main thing keeping him from being a top 10, top 5 player. Like I mentioned, he's a great runner, probably a little bit less elusive than Sam Howell, but a lot more physical through contact. And then in 2020, he really struggled taking care of the football, but he did a great job last season of cutting down bad decisions. His turnover-worthy play rate, according to PFF, was 2.0%, which was better than any of the top quarterbacks in this class. Final thing that I'll say about Matt Corral is that he doesn't have great touch on short passes. He kind of just lasers every throw. Not a huge problem, but definitely something I noticed.